A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is one of Mark Twain's most famous works. It was published in 1889 and is widely considered an American classic. Given my own previous readings, I thought it would be appropriate for me to write in on the topic. In summary, the book begins with a literary device of the writer meeting a strange man and talking to him before reading a manuscript of his story. The strange man is a native of Connecticut and proud of it, an industrialist of the weapons manufacturing variety, and proud of that too. He is also a foreman on the factory floor, and in a scuffle with one of his underlings, he takes a hit on the head with a crowbar. Henry Morgan, the Yankee, awakes in 6th century Arthurian England. He is immediately taken prisoner by a knight and led to the court of King Arthur. He is to be kept in a dungeon until his relatives pay a ransom for his release. But given that his relatives all live in the 19th century, that's impossible. So instead, he pretends that an eclipse is caused by his own great sorcerous powers, and he is able to get his liberty, which he follows up by blowing up Merlin's tower with dynamite during a thunderstorm, establishing himself as the chief royal advisor and wizard for the realm. He then immediately begins trying to destroy the order of things through mercantile, mechanical, and social methods. This culminates in a civil war, eerily like the First World War, leaving the country in ruins, before Merlin does some sort of magic to return the American to his own time by means of extended slumber. Now, where is King Arthur in all this? He is portrayed as a largely powerless, silly, middle-aged man, incapable of understanding both his people and the sayings of another time, due to being less evolved. Tragically, King Arthur remains ignorant of his wife's unfaithfulness until this is revealed out of spite, resulting in his death, and that of much of his court. All of this is downplayed to put forward the displaced Yankee and his notions. Mark Twain is a man of his time, and as a man of his time, he believed he was a progressive and ahead of his time. And as such, despite his nominal commitment to being a Presbyterian Christian, his ideals are more obviously aligned with a kind of progressive evolutionist. As such, he is firmly convinced that a normal man from the American 19th century is superior in every way to an Englishman of the 6th century, regardless of class or training. This presents something of a contradiction, as the character, and by extension Twain, vigorously abhor any sort of inequality and spend great amounts of ink utterly denigrating the nobles of yore as lazy, layabouts, evil, and useless. This is not simple dislike, it is active hate. Twain goes on and goes so far as to justify the French Revolution and further to imply that violent revolution, like the French Revolution, is a desirable outcome against the nobility in any civilization. Below are 2 quotes. This was not the sort of experience for a statesman to encounter who was planning out a peaceful revolution in his mind, for it could not help bringing up the ungetaroundable fact that all, gentle cant and philosophizing to the contrary notwithstanding, no people in the world ever did achieve their freedom by goody-goody talk and moral suasion, it being immutable law that all revolutions that will succeed must begin in blood, whatever may answer afterward. If history teaches anything, it teaches that. What this folk needed, then, was a reign of terror and a guillotine, and I was the wrong man for them. Why, it was like reading about France and the French before the ever-memorable and blessed Revolution, which swept away 1,000 years of such villainy away in one swift tidal wave. 1. A settlement of that hoary debt in proportion of half a drop of blood for each hogshead of it that had been pressed by slow tortures out of that people in the weary stretch of 10 centuries of wrong and shame and misery, the like of which was not to be mated but in hell. This builds into the next point. Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, is attacking the concept of a better past. The idea of degeneration or devolution is anathema to him. Everything must be bigger, more grand, more unified. Evolution in peoples, in politics, in economics, in religion, in warfare, in culture. Free market economist Thomas Sowell would call this the vision of the anointed, contrasting it with the tragic view of man as basically unchanging, unable to change, and self-perfect. Twain's nascent Yankee Republic in England is still destroyed, the end still presented as a tragedy by him, but it is through the active attack of his greatest foe, the Church. Twain conceals his differences with the Church as doctrinal, presenting himself as a supporter of free conscience while telescoping the horrors of every variation of Rome into a single ancient century, and applying its broad brush to those sincere in faith. Faith is presented as merely trained fancies and delusions, boring and stifling to the brain, and the final enemy of progress. The church's interdict, clumsily applied to the main character, destroys the cultural revolution and demands battle. The knights answer the church's call in this first crusade. Twain's character, using modern weapons, destroys 35,000 of them with hardly any remorse through the power of his preferred god, science. As a final bit of theft from the original tradition, while Arthur is killed off-screen in a manner made fun of and treated lightly, the main character is stabbed by a wounded knight while trying to help the wounded knight, and forced into a protracted sleep by Merlin. Merlin then electrocutes himself in a somewhat horrific manner before the remaining progressive loyalists scatter into the countryside and scatter from the focus of the tale. Thus, instead of Arthur being a potential continual protector for the people of England, a dangerous weapons manufacturer and progressive lays at rest until his own age, to awake and die virtually alone. The sad words of loss spoken by the main character in his delirium somewhat excite the reader's emotions, even if the reader were ideologically hostile to the work. After all, it is normal for us to feel sympathy for a man torn from his wife and child, and to die, his works ruined unavenged. But this is only clever writing from Twain to cover one of his tendencies in his writing. That is, he often uses the trick of killing off the characters when he doesn't know what to do with them. Twain cannot answer why his Superman would fail against history, against knights, king, and church, except through literal magic and unthinking, stupid, violent assault. He has written himself into a corner. So he tries to turn the failure of Camelot into a mere sideshow to the truly massive battle of knights against electric wire, Gatling guns, and dynamite. Yet despite his efforts, his progress all counts for nothing, destroyed by his own hand to avoid letting it serve the people he has always hated. In this work, King Arthur's moments of glory are limited to the acts furthest from his career and story. In a side adventure, he carries a girl dying of smallpox to her mother, risking himself to do it. In another side adventure, he decides that slavery is bad and to be banned after being enslaved for a while himself. His displays of martial prowess are stripped from him as shared delusions, common murder, or misplaced anger, driven by a slavish obedience to a corrupt church, and willingly bamboozled by women and cheap magicians. In short, the work is a fundamental rejection and subversion of the tradition whose fame it seeks to wear and steal. It is possible that viewers could think I am too hard on Twain in my stances. I provide 3 further points of interest. First, it is worth noting that the kill all characters plot device is something Twain explains in one of his essays and mentions in more than one of his speeches. The second is continued hope for revolution and social reform in European countries of his day. For example, he says in this book, whoever thinks it is a mistake is himself mistaken. Yes, there is plenty good enough material for a republic in the most degraded people that ever existed, even the Russians, plenty of manhood in them, even in the Germans. If one could but force it out of its timid and suspicious privacy, to overthrow and trample in the mud any throne that ever was set up, and any nobility that ever supported it. The scholar of the 20th century cannot help but wince at these examples. Germany's democratically elected choice in the early 30s is still talked about as the darkest time in human history, especially amongst people Twain shows himself to like. Russia's various alleged democratic governments have widely been condemned in the West for expansionism and purging far more extreme than that done under the Tsars. Yet would Twain ultimately care? All these horrible things done, but the thrones and crowns are crushed. Men are declared equal. Thirdly, we reach one of the further divergences from the knightly character and that of Twain, quoting him, "If I had the remaking of man, he wouldn't have any conscience." If the knightly character could be summarized as trueness to one's duties, or acting in a way to bring honor to oneself with valor, this is not that. The conscience must be obeyed. This idea of murdering the conscience to enjoy life more vividly is seen throughout Twain's other short stories. Yet a Connecticut Yankee in one way does read as an appeal to conscience. When you remember that Samuel Clemens was not really a Yankee and was trying rather hard to blend in with the respectable, sophisticated anti-slavery activists in his own neighborhood, they literally lived across the street from him. The work does take an aspect of a dispirited, deracinated, conquered person trying to atone for the accidental connections of birth and integrate with a local majority, an appeal to the locals to be allowed to live in their polite society, a society that has, since that time, like Camelot, decayed and is lost to us. There is a deep irony in Twain writing a character who is able to stand up to a whole country and force his moral vision on it, when that is the opposite of what he did in his own life.